Here we are once again. It's the Lean Into Art Cast, a show where a couple of visual storytellers get together, take a walk around a topic, try to look at it, break it apart, and really give it a solid, hard stare, then try to walk away with some kind of useful thing to do with that information. We are visual storytellers who think hard about storytelling, so you will too. My name is Jerzy Droz, cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
Hey, I'm Rob Stenzinger. I'm a designer, group creative facilitator and coder. How are you doing, Jerzy? I was. It's so funny when you describe what we do, and I just start. My imagination goes all over the place because I also thought it was somehow for some reason I was picturing Indiana Jones too, and like we pull the heart out of these creative topics to gain its powers. Anyway, I don't know.
And then it disintegrates in our hand as we laugh maniacally.
Indeed. But also, how you're. And speaking of that, how are you doing?
I'm okay. I am experiencing what the kids call stress as we roll into spring. It seems that one of the themes of my springs tends to be a lot of hectic activity. Yeah, I mean, I could go into a lot of detail, which we'll probably save for the On the Ground section, but I'm not just trying to set up our topic for today. I mean, it really is a timely topic that we chose. And we tend to do that with the show. We tend to, when we're evaluating what our topics are, we're like, okay, well, what's happening in our lives? What are we experiencing? What are we dealing with? What are we wrestling with? And that's how we come up with these things most of the time. So I'll turn it around and ask you, how are you doing, pal?
Pretty good. I think I can draw from life experience to contribute to our topic of dealing with your creative stress, creative project stress, reframing it, that kind of thing. We'll try to bring out some examples and find some handy ways to examine them in sort of the high level, right? During our 10,000 foot section, we'll look at sort of things in conceptually, but then try to get something practical out of it. This has the danger of maybe being, but I'm trying to through this disclaimer diffuse that. Might be just a superstitious ritual, this could end up at least dancing on the line of being self-helpy, right? As an episode, I don't think that's entirely bad.
I don't think that's bad.
Aware of it, right?
Right. I don't think that's bad, and I would counter disclaim you by saying that this is also about.
I like this.
I'll see your disclaimer, and I'll raise you a disclaimer.
Nice.
No, I would throw in that this is about sharing experience, so as to broach the subject, not so much about dictating how other people should live their lives, right? Which is a different kind of thing.
Yes.
No.
No, I agree. I was reflecting upon an image that we've evoked in the past of the Mr. Anthony Robbins, right, being the smiling, whatever. And so you know what, more power to him. I've consumed his materials before, once upon a time, and all sorts of advice can have value depending on the context, as far as when you get it and how you get it and all that kind of stuff, and if it's applicable to you at the time. And yeah, anyway.
Yeah,
he's an easy one to pick on.
Yeah, hey, and
representing the kind of simple solutions, and making a pageantry out of that, right. And big smile, expensive, whatever.
Hey, dude, I've read Richard Bach. And not just Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the other books. All right, so that said, we're going to broach this topic as usefully and as thoughtfully as we can and share our experiences on this thing. But before we do that, we've got some business we got to take care of on the front end of this thing. There's 3 of these spots where we got to take care of some business. And, we're going to do a little bit of an ad call out, an ad read, as it were. And who advertises on the show? Us, because we make this show. This show is produced by Rob and me. Rob and I make lots of different kinds of things as visual storytellers. And one of the things Rob said he did at the beginning was coding and game design. And this is a game that you can get from Rob today called This Panda Needs You. It's at this-panda.com. You can also do a search for it in the iOS App Store, right? And I'll just read right from the site. Here we go. This is making it a real ad read. This panda needs you. Help this cute panda restack her building blocks that have been blown over by the wind. Stack the blocks in the same order panda had them. Be careful to match the colors and shapes. This panda needs you is a fun, self-paced, all ages block stacking game. It's simple design. The game is easy for kids of all ages to understand and enjoy. The game promotes the early math skills of pattern recognition, matching, and problem solving, but I would submit for the adults who want to play. It's also very relaxing. So for those of us who just need like a little break away from the work, from the hard work of the day, and just want to put together some patterns, for those of us who relax with things like Tetris, and also like cute things like pandas, I'd submit this-panda.com is for you. You can get it at the iTunes App Store. And then I make a thing called Boulder and Fleet, and that's boulderandfleet.com, a webcomic about a bear and a bird who go on adventures together. I describe it as like sort of like the Incredible Hulk television series, but with animals, right? They're walking along, they're minding their own business, people are in trouble, their natural inclination is to help people, so they wind up getting embroiled in trouble. And for the past month, Boulder has been holding up a giant piece of cliff, and his partner Fleet has returned, and she's going to help him get out of this jam. And it updates every week at boulderandfleet.com, and then there's a Patreon as well if you want to get behind-the-scenes stuff. But then
the URL for that is patreon.com/Jerzy, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Exactly. It's a good place to get the behind the scenes, the extra info and details and some how-tos and stuff that you, or like almost like the how-to is implied because it's like these extra steps of your process, which your process is it's a lot of fun to follow. Honestly, I've followed your comic process throughout the years, and I've benefited tremendously by paying attention to it.
Oh wow,
So.
Thanks. Yeah, and there's on the Patreon I also post like deleted scenes. Like here's like an alternate way I originally envisioned the scene, but then rethought it, and so you get to see sort of like how my aborted materials as well. But if you are here and you say, well, I'm really here just for the discussion that you guys do about visual storytelling because I really like that part after all. By the way, thanks for saying that. Thanks for thinking that. Thanks for transmitting that to my brain just now. But we also have more material beyond that. Beyond the podcast, we have videos that you can download at leanintoart.com/workshops, comics fundamentals, a 4-part course on making comics from the ground up kind of thing. Rob's got storytellers UI tools, turning jokes into comics, laughing Yeti monkey spaghetti, making video games from your creator-owned comics, and these are all name your price. You can get them for free if you want, or you can throw us a tip if you think like, hey, it's nice of you guys to collect this information and put it into a presentable format for me. Here's value for value, right? That's at leanintoart.com/workshops. So, hey Rob, let's talk about stress.
Should
I do the
anxious already?
10,000 feet up music?
Yeah.
All right.
That's where we're going.
New 10,000 feet up music. I wanted Rob to be pumped up for this one. And he's already shadowboxing.
I'm so stoked. DBZ. Yeah. Those okay, so that's actually Dragon Ball, right?
Yes.
Not quite DBZ. Just in my bubbling excitement. Hey. It's where are we going now? I don't even know what to do with myself. I'm just ready to freaking punch boulders. So
see, okay, that was me trying to hack the game.
Yeah.
Because but here's the thing. This is why I did this. I mean, this was partially because like I know Rob loves this, and I want to make Rob happy because he's my friend. But a part of it also is that you broach a topic like stress. You like thinking about stress. It's almost like quantum physics. The moment you start thinking about it, you start affecting it, and the way you approach it and think about it has a direct effect on how it affects you. Sometimes it seems to me. I don't know. What do you think?
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, directly from your example, there's the characters in Dragon Ball tend to you have this certain quirk and personality that serves the storytelling method, which is the serial drama, right? The action drama, what have you, and a comedy action drama. And you need to have this constant like ebb and flow of tension, this escalation, release, and what have you. And one of the and these characters that go through that, they don't just get worn out. They tend to be interested in adapting to that escalation, and they're very resilient because of that.
Gosh, I feel like we're already treading into on the ground stuff with that modeling exercise that you just did.
That's what we do that. Let's backtrack.
All right, let's backtrack.
Stress.
So,
What are we talking about?
okay. So, okay, Rob, what do we mean by stress and, as you coined it, creative project stress?
Well, I wanted to give it some more specific zone besides saying, like, here's the planet Earth. It's got a lot of different environments, right? Stress is like the planet Earth. Creative project stress is like one continent, right? So at least we can get a little bit more specific. Because I think you bring about your whole human experience when you face your projects, the kind of project you choose, the people who you choose to work with and serve, and the kinds of anything that can be surrounding it. But where it's more specific, I think, and useful, and sort of very lean into artish to focus on the creative project angle of experiencing stress.
So, in other words, I'm going to repeat what I think you just said, or what I think you're alluding to, is there's always stuff going on in our lives, and there's always a lot of other demands being placed upon us.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're going to try to focus on is just the stress that is caused from pursuing a creative project.
And I think inherently we may end up bumping against the boundaries of
we will.
Part of the stress of creative projects is making the space to do them. You end up dealing with other areas of your life. Of course, the continent doesn't exist on a planet alone. It exists in that greater context.
There's more of that metaphor going all the way down as the tectonic plates and how they all interact.
Oh, sure.
In
Exactly. Magma and
yeah.
the tensions and the volcanoes and the mountains. I don't know. Yeah, absolutely. There's it doesn't exist alone, but I thought it would be of service to us to think of things like just how it affects our projects, maybe looking at maybe how do we bump into it when we're trying to make stuff, think about stress in general, but then throw that into the creative context of like, well, you think about the dictionary definition of stress. It's basically like pressure or tension. And I think a lot of us who have tried to make stuff and have made things have experienced plenty of pressure and tension and
yes.
feel like a physical material that is somehow undergoing stressful force, right? What about you, Jerzy? What do you think about for this topic? And us serving it.
And us serving it. Well, I kind of want to dig into this note that you wrote that I want elaboration on, because I think this is terrific. What are we doing? Is this lean into darkness? Are we treading down a scary, somber, foggy path that really we should be leaving to counselors for?
Sure.
And are we or are we charting a path through something where all we're going to do is whine about how hard it is to be so special?
Yes. Well, I think being artists, we have the danger of doing that, and I don't know, like just thinking about the so emotion is such a strong signal and can fuel so much of what we do. We can give it, we can crank it all the way up to 100% of the voice that it gets. It gets all the voice, and here wow, here comes all my art problems and and feelings about that. And I don't want to frame that it's very much not typically, anyone who's heard the podcast knows that, well, that's not how we typically approach things, right? I mean, that's, yeah, we tend to put in a little bit of space in between like that signal and then what we end up doing. And a lot of times we fill the space with like techniques and heuristics and stuff we're trying to learn as far as what do we do about that emotion. And
Right.
yeah, so not to devalue, because I love so much art that comes from people that I think are just far more emotionally, they give that, their knob is definitely cranked way closer to 100% than mine.
And I mean, to be fair, I would argue that a lot of our stuff, that is us turning that knob to 100%, right?
Oh,
there are
sure.
scenes in Art Geek Sue which you can tell are immensely personal, you know.
Oh, sure.
Right.
It comes out, yeah, no doubt. But like, yeah, inherently in this activity, right, where we are employing that sort of exploratory analytical thing that we both are pretty into. And
Okay.
yeah.
But then one
So-
little final piece of context I think is super important to approach before we start digging into, you know, the 10,000 feet up stuff proper. I wonder if you could touch on this point too, Rob, about where we're coming from, our position, that's our vantage point that's important to acknowledge, and not necessarily place a value judgment on, but more like to shine a light on, okay, for important context in this discussion, here's who we are, and this is where we're coming from when it comes to this topic.
This was something that just popped up and was glaring to me in trying to create these notes. When I realized that there are so many different possible contexts and relationships to have with stress, and like, what is your personal makeup and your history? And I want to just say, like, it's important for us to acknowledge that we're coming from a place of privilege, and I would say we're in the range of average health. You know, one could debate or analyze that, but like, we have conveniences when we're in that range, as far as like tools that are easier to draw upon. And and I think we're coming from that place, and there's sort of this underpinning to this whole exploration. It's easy to have like a different context, and your context doesn't mean like, well, now you can't have successful creative projects or successful outcomes related to your stress in those projects. It's just like your path is probably different or informed by something different than we're coming from.
Yep. Okay. I think we framed it up. Rather, you did, and I just kind of prodded. So we both, at least I led off by saying, like, I'm experiencing some stress, and I'm preparing to experience more stress this spring. So have I been stressed? You bet. Have you been stressed, Rob?
Yeah, right on. A lot, no doubt.
Okay.
And for me, right, relative, yeah. So.
All right,
like,
can you characterize what that looks like? Like, what does that signal look like when you experience it?
Oh, I find it very distracting. Like, when things are actually under my skin, I can get to this. It's a weird feedback loop where I think to do something useful, to create a different circumstance, to change the situation, like, and to get out of this stressful dynamic. And in fact, I'm lucky when sometimes that works, and then oftentimes it's not working. So, for instance, whenever I'm hunting for a new gig, right, I will get very single-minded, and you can even hear it in that dark version of my laugh. Like I will. I will attempt to solve that task so much every single day, and such a huge portion of every single day, that it's just, yeah, that's an example of something that, like, will get in where my method and the thing because I've let it get to me in such in the way that it's so stressfully distracting that I think, oh, giving it that attention. So, well, what do? Here's a problem. Well, go fix the problem. But not all the problem is under my control, and I attempt to make more of it under my control, and it's inherently not. So, right, there's an example of like it can be, infinitely close, yet not at hand, and I will just keep at it.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds familiar to me. Some of the language I hear, like for me, like I look for a lot of verbal signals. Like my inner dialogue will betray when I'm feeling it. It'll be harder for me to detect the emotion sometimes, but it'll be easy for me to detect the words, right? So I'll say, like, if I hear myself saying, "How many times do I have to touch this thing?" Like if it's a project that just keeps going through lots and lots of revision cycles, necessary ones, a lot of times, right? It's a good thing that it's being iterated upon so much, but I'll notice that when I'm stressed, when I don't have a good relationship with that, and I'll say, like, how many times do I got to touch this thing? When is this thing going to end? Right? That's the signal for me. And it's a single-mindedness in that if it pops up again, I can't shelve it. I got to get it out of my field of vision now, because it's such an unpleasant feeling to have it back on my radar. Does that make sense? Does that sound?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when it comes back, I mean, so how? So you're saying like you notice it, especially when you have that kind of framing of, or the description of the situation.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
I'll
wait a minute, that's another one of those, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll hear myself having the dialogue. I'll actually hear my mind say, "Oh, I got to touch this thing again." I mean, that's the exact language my mind uses when I'm encountering a lingering or repetitive project. It'll be one where there might be a lot of like what Pressfield calls the resistance. It's one that I don't enjoy as much as other projects, right?
Oh, sure. So like sitting down, it's like, okay, there's a work session about to begin, got a chunk of your work day, and hey, what's next? This thing. Is that okay? Oh man.
That is like almost literally what my brain sounds like. Hey, what's next? Oh, this thing. Here we go. And the funny thing is, and again, this might be like, like sort of telegraphing my punches with where we're going with On the Ground later on, but like when I just sit down and do it, and I get into like that, like whatever they call it, that flow kind of thing, where like the work starts just happening, it's always fine. But it's that initial resistance to touching it again that makes me so anxious. And a lot of my the way I encounter and deal with it is very verbally. It's very much inner dialogue, the way I talk through it. It's not like I'm walking down the streets going like ants, ants, ants or anything, but it's like there's like a continuous dialogue going on in my brain about it. I don't know, is it at all verbal for you, or is it more?
Yeah, it is actually. It is, and it's sort of there's sort of a, it's detectable. It's like whatever picture I'm painting, whatever picture I'm describing, and how I'm seeing the situation, it ends up being that of maybe an imposition. Maybe I'm and then I will I have all this self-talk of like, why say some things to myself sometimes where if I'm like, I'm living wrong, like clearly I've made wrong choices to this point. This is occurring because of choice, and clearly there's been some wrong choices.
Yes. And, I've never used that exact expression, but I think we're gonna now. I'm living wrong.
I'm living wrong. And it's in which then I have this ping pong back and forth. Literally, I think there's probably, in some AI in back in my head, there's at least 2-3 Dragon Ball Z characters, right? And and they'll be like, come on, power up, you can, like whatever, cheering and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. Whew, this is difficult, but, and so that weird tension and difficulty and navigating back and forth between like this very stressed out picture and this picture this other thing that's trying to find the rest of the possibility behind the stressed out picture, or trying to just sort of take a fire hose to whatever scarcities that's mucking things up and say, get that, wash it away. No. And because like there's some part of your brain that's not this group of cheering Dragon Ball characters that is just spreading this muck, and you just gotta tell them to knock it off, and behind it is this other possibility. So then that's where it looks like to me, because I have that kind of tense debate with myself, that it doesn't feel good. So that's an indicator to me.
No, it doesn't feel good. And one more thing before we go any further is, how does this affect, and we're both guys who, and I think like a lot of creative people, we have to do a lot of different things in any given day, right? Very infrequently do I get an uninterrupted 8-hour block for any one specific kind of task. So what that means is I got to do a lot of jumping around between different kinds of projects. Like, okay, I'm going to work 4 hours on penciling this book, and then I got to go to a A2CAF meeting, and then after that I got to teach a class, right? How does, I'm going to characterize this from your standpoint, when you have to jump from one thing that's causing you a lot of anxiety to another thing we got to shift gears, what effect does that have on everything else, if any?
I think it has an effect. I think friends and family notice. Yeah. And shifting gears, it's it's I don't know, like I hadn't really considered going into this, but like there's sort of there's kind of a myth that I was really into in my teens and late teens and 20s, heck, into my early 30s too, where I really thought that I could live different contexts. You know what I mean? Like I can have my family and my work, and they don't have to be, I don't have to be my whole self anywhere, or you know what I mean? That like really sounds not like a good idea, saying that out loud. But I think there's a variety of things that reinforce that, right? Like some workplaces have a culture that maybe doesn't echo your other parts of your life, right? Maybe there's no cartoonists, as far as the eye can see. Maybe there's nobody who has a side gig, as far as the eye can see. Maybe there's no whatever, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the workplace, and so once I've noticed when I've gone places that have others who do some similar things, I've found it way easier as far as having this, and honestly, I don't know if I would have figured it out until I experienced that. The whole presence of the acceptance made me realize that, oh, wait a minute, that actually, like, to set aside so much of who I am going to this place for a chunks of my, my days, it had some kind of, background radiation stress at the very least of maintaining the boundaries between these contexts. And it's not like you can, I don't know. So I like the idea of being your whole self. That's what came out of that. Yeah, I don't know if
what you said and more. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. Is that when I get, I certainly have subscribed to similar theories or approaches in terms of contexts, right? So like in the context of my classroom, I'm going to be a different kind of me, right? But never a suppressed version of me, if that makes any sense. Right?
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Like this? I need to learn more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
how do you do that? Because like you're describing something that to me is like one of the still excused places when you have like a literal performance, right?
Yeah. Right. In a performance, then okay, but see, we're talking about something where there is a very explicit and proportionally large degree of service in mind. I am there in service to a function of this group. Whereas when you are in a more traditional kind of workplace, that role is somewhat muted, right? Everybody's in service at different times in different parts of the day, but it's never like a full on, you got to be on all day, right?
Yeah.
See
That's
the
what I
difference?
used to try to do. Yeah.
Yeesh, that's tough.
Yeah, it was.
That's almost impossible.
Yes.
So yeah. So like muting myself or diminishing myself for a different context, like you were saying, like in a situation where like there's no touch point for what I consider to be like my core values would be exceedingly unpleasant, and it would cause extreme background stress radiation, as it were.
Yeah.
But then also, yes, so like when I'm in that mode of, oh, this again, get it out of there. This again, I gotta touch this again. All right, here it is. I'm doing the change that you want, and boom, it's out of my way. Okay, now I can focus on the thing that I want to do, and now I'm totally tweaked up, torqued up, and I can't address it properly. I try to do the thing that I'm trying to do. Oh, it's not happening the way I want it to. God dang it, when am I gonna find the time to do this thing, right? And that starts this horrible dialogue of where I'm not being attentive to the project. I'm not being attentive to the next thing I have to do because I'm too busy still to use that old Buddhist story of like, I set the lady down a long time ago. Why are you still thinking about her? Right? You remember that one? The two Buddhists come to the river?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's really good. It's the in a nutshell, I'm assuming folks know the reference, but in a nutshell, there's a young and old Buddhist walking along, and they encounter a river, and the bridge is out, and there is a I think there's an elderly woman who needs to carry your groceries or something like that, or I don't know. I'm screwing up the story. Anyway, they help this woman across the river. He
picks her up, carries her across.
Picks her up. Yeah, she doesn't thank him. And the young monk is just kind of waiting and watching this, sees the old monk go through the effort and gets all wet and stuff. She's fine. She goes on her way. And then after some extended period of time, the young monk is like, well, come on, why? It is basically speaking to the injustice and is frustrated about how could you have done that? And she didn't even thank you, whatever. And the old monk says that, well, why are you still carrying her?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I set her down a long time ago, and I think that's a pretty awesome outlook. And to be able to sort of encounter something and then just move past it. There's no
not great at it.
Yeah.
I am not great at it. There are times when I pull it off, but for the most part, it takes a lot of careful, thoughtful, practice to say, okay, we're changing context now. We're doing something else. We're going to address this with our whole mind and heart and everything, right? Super not easy.
It isn't. And so, but interesting. So we can follow up on that later too. The whole
okay. So can we talk about,
yeah.
We're going to follow up on this later because the goal is to eliminate stress because stress is bad.
Exactly.
Being stressed is an unpleasant experience. We don't like to experience unpleasant things. Let's fix it.
Yeah. So you mentioned Tetris earlier. So like one's life with stress is like a disorganized Tetris board that's about to fill up. And when it fills up, you die. So that's a problem. No, we're being facetious, going over the top here.
I want to buy your self-help book.
It's going to be...
It's intense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The especially Tetris is an unwinnable game, right? Deep.
Oh.
I know.
I never thought of it that way.
Right. Sound of one hand clapping. So, anyway, we stress is characterized so commonly as like it's bad, or like it has this badness to it, and like you could use the badness maybe, but that's the best possible thing you can do, because boy is it just terrible for you. And look at all the things that it causes. That narrative is common. And just essentially do a Google search, is stress bad for you? To find lots of that narrative. But all right, is it bad always? Is it really bad always, Jersey?
Um, Stress, like fear, is a signal of the dynamism of the moment, right? Fear is, yes, it's an unpleasant experience, but it also alerts you to not doing something stupid. And stress is just another signal. Like hunger, is hunger bad? No, in and of itself, right? Hunger is a feeling alerting you that you maybe need more food. Stress is a signal, right? So, pain, is not fun, and I would never argue that people necessarily need to experience continuous pain, nor should they experience continuous stress. But I would argue that it has a function like fear, like hunger, right?
Sure. I guess, yeah, overall, there's some pieces of our human system.
Something that Dan
they've helped
Mishkin,
us.
a quote that Dan Mishkin cites a lot, especially when we're working together on a project, is nothing focuses the mind like the thread of the hangman's noose, right? A deadline, and I experienced this when I worked in the Warren Commission report, dude. I mean, I was breaking boards like crazy, and I was knocking out. There were days where I was touching 8 pages a day, a day. I mean, not from scratch, but like putting them in various stages of completion, right? And having to spread my mind across the various storytelling concerns of very different parts of it. And the 8 pages, they were not necessarily in sequence. It was like, oh, I'm working on a page from chapter 1, and then 2 pages from chapter 5, and so on, right? But I was doing it at like this really optimized kind of state of mind because of the stress of the deadline.
Well, I've heard it's really hard to get to the top of Everest also, right? And what I understand is that people don't just go there. It is a capacity that you build in yourself to be able to possibly do such a thing. I mean, that's what I'm hearing with what you said. It's like that behind that circumstances is years of practice, right?
Sure.
It's I mean, it's interesting how we end up relating to that moment can be pretty different. If it's like, hi, I'm an intern,
yeah,
and I'm here to help.
Yeah.
You're asking me to do what?
Well, and let me also say, I'm speaking from 2 years later, where it's like, that's a long time ago now. I'm looking back, and I'm pleased with myself for getting through that okay, right? At the time, you were there, Rob. You remember what it was like. I was not. I was not going like, stress is great.
Let's have a thoughtful conversation about stress. I have some. I'd like to talk about it. No, it's right. It's so I guess our position in time, like when it is it happening, how intent, like all that stuff. It seems to what an interesting concept too. Like so. It means so many things, and I don't think we're going to really, like at best we're going to have these general pieces of it as we explore the topic. One thing I wanted to make sure that one piece I wanted to point out is that, well, like the signals of hunger and fear and things that you pointed out, like they can serve a purpose. They can focus your mind. They can do something of it can be of service, right? And not just in a way of like, all the only gain is through pain and, whatever kind of like a machismo philosophy kind of thing. No, this is a human thing. Like everyone, male, female, young and old, we all have stress. Which I need to I want to have a greater vocabulary on the topic because again, it covers such a wide gamut. And set of circumstances, yet it can also it's not just negative, right? So there's a book I've read, I've mentioned a few times. I think I've read it about like 1.5, 2-ish times, called The Upside of Stress, and it's by Kelly McGonigal. And she has this book and a TED Talk, and she teaches a class that's essentially about this as well. I think at Stanford. And it's essentially the idea that we'll probably go into further into this in the on the ground, but the how we look at stress changes our relationship with stress. And we kind of said as much already in the beginning, right? And but there's a lot of research to back that up. It's and it's probably something that each of us has personally experienced at some point, but like just changing the context of a thing, like I don't know, like getting that like some kind of feeling of huge victory from like producing so many pages on a certain day. There must have been a threshold, some point that you passed that was like there was payoff or something.
Yeah.
It gave it extra meaning, maybe.
Certainly. Being part of something bigger than me, right? I think of that line from The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to totally butcher it, but like the King of Rohan, tells, and they're all stuck in Helm's Deep, and he's like, let's go out there and face these insurmountable odds. Maybe we'll have such an end that'll be worth a song or something like that, right? There's that kind of thing, right? That like, however this turns out, I'm part of something big and something that's meaningful to me. I'm helping a friend. I was working on this thing with Dan Mishkin, who is like, before I worked with him creatively, we were friends. So like there was that aspect to it. And then, there was the point at which I noticed in the spreadsheet that the number of pages to be done and the number of pages done changed in proportion to one another, right? The proportion of done started outweighing to be done, right? And knowing that you're over that hill, things like that. Yeah.
Isn't that the point in the story, though, where somehow, there's a lot more time in the hammock until, one more panic helps with a gear up scene, and then anyway.
Before the music montage, when I flip down the welder's mask and then do something amazing.
Yeah, I do think some of us do that, where it's like, okay. Things feel stress is a signal. Like how intense do I have to work on this? Do you push all the way through all that? All that's going to be based on your interest, your process. It's easy, it can feel pretty easy to push things off, and I'm not. I have a neutral stance on that. It's all that's a resource management thing, up to everyone who's managing their resources. So, but. What are what are some things that like when artists like digging for a little bit further into the creative project stuff, things that when you make things, like what how does stress show up?
Right, because I was talking specifically about like a deadline thing, where that's like an external.
Deadline's perfect though, but it's perfect though. Like that's a great example.
Yeah, but there's also other like sort of like. Probably, I would call them more insidious kinds of stresses, because a lot of them for me come from within, come from internal dialogue, maybe based upon false assumptions or external storytelling that the world at large has given me, that I've unwittingly bought into, whatever the case. But it's a quieter kind of more insidious kind of stress, like when you think about like creative success, right? Or like, is my stuff good?
Can I live up to those inspirations I followed?
Yeah, right? Like, am I ever going to lay out a page as good as Walt Simonson does? Am I ever going to have the energy that Rick Leonardi does? Am I ever going to have the bouncy, like, sort of kinetic playfulness that Eric Larson does? Am I ever going to have the supple characterization that Linda Medley does? Like all these things, like all these kind of unquantifiable things. That can be a stressor. Like, I finished the page. Is it good? I feel good about finishing it. But I mean, and then that could start a whole nother round of dialogue. Well, what data do I have that it's good? I'll have my sense of satisfaction about it. Has anybody else said anything nice about it? Uh-oh.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Is it internally? Is it past your taste, your sort of your critical analysis, but then like what about yeah, you could say general reaction to the thing you made once it's out in the world. You could say specific desired reactions. Maybe you had a particular couple of people you wanted to react to. Well, yeah, there's
Yeah.
we make
Oh,
stuff. We make stuff to have an effect on people, right? I mean, why else would you do it? It's communicating a thing, and typically transmitting a lot of emotion with that thing.
for sure.
Yep.
So I mean that's kind of tied into recognition as well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so has the outside world have my peers or the people whom I respect in my industry, have they acknowledged what I've contributed in any kind of meaningful way?
Mm.
Um,
Or if you have had that recognition, did you get it again recently? And so now you're on a treadmill.
yes. Oh
Yep.
my God.
So artists, yeah, we have some fun stresses.
I just think of that
that
scene
are,
with Bart Simpson and Krusty where he's like, what have you done for me lately? And Bart's like, I brought you that donut. And he's like, and I'll never, or no, I brought you that Danish and I'll never forget it. Yes, he will. Because he's the id of the creative person.
mm.
I love Krusty. Uh, so then there's
yeah.
also, okay, I wonder if you could weigh in on the stresses of being a breadwinner, right? You got a family
Sure.
to
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, financial stresses is certainly another flavor of the stress signal. Things that I mean, I think that probably feeds into the whole like gig hunting thing I mentioned earlier. When it's like, well, what is my next main gig going to be, and what sure, there are a variety of criteria that I have as far as finding where it makes sense to try to serve, but then the whole sustainability of it is part of the financial is part of that sustainability, and yeah, definitely a source of concerns. Let's see, what about yeah, I guess there's another artist thing that occurred to me was the just sort of it's a bit of a false dichotomy thing, but I think as a common like it clearly as a lean into art topic we would find a way to explore it, but it's almost like the whole us versus them thing with people who are on an artist path versus finding other paths to make a trade where maybe, well, I mean, this fits in with the gig hunting thing, or the whole like having a main gig and side gigs where do other people where you work have side gigs? Are there other people who make comics? Are there other people who that kind of thing? So are you I guess finding a community to connect with and coexist with in a way that sort of feeds into you making stuff, instead of causing some kind of scarcity there where it's like, well, I can't really talk about it that much during big chunks of the day, or but not even just not talk about it much, but like it'd be awesome to be like getting better at this and having other people to bounce ideas off of and that kind of thing. Or who knows, finding people to collaborate with.
Yeah, having some kind of real life people who understand what it takes to do the things that you're doing, or at least know the struggles that you're encountering. Because you could be the most empathetic person in the world, right? But there's that old expression about like try to explain skiing to somebody who's never done it before, right? And then you got all sorts of communication problems. There's like an effortlessness that happens when you meet somebody who's encountered the exact same thing that you have. Right?
Yeah, a shared experience is the most awesome shortcut for communication. Yeah, it can lead to other misunderstandings, but it inherently has some benefit for like an increased vocabulary of ideas you can exchange.
Yep, absolutely. And also, I mean, like the whole, you know, you talk about like other paths to making a trade. A lot of creative people at various points in their career find themselves having to do something else in order to support their endeavors, right? They have to subsidize their income somehow, right?
Yeah, very good point.
When I was
that
11,
alone. Yep.
when I was 11, and I put down that Crisis on Infinite Earths #3, or I was 10 or whatever, I didn't say I'm going to make comics and teach comics classes. You know? And I love teaching. I love it, and it's enriched my life in so many ways that I can't even count. But it was not part of the original formula, right? Something I took on to keep me going while I pursued the comics. And now they're kind of like, there's like a balance between the two. But that came through a lot of real serious internal dialogue and negotiation and, you know, really, you know, kind of wrestling with it. Because early on, there's that thing that people, there's that this goes back to something kind of like earlier when you were talking about like this assumption that you bought into as a young man of like, oh, I'm gonna at work, I'm gonna be this person, at home I'm gonna be this person. There's this whole like, you are one thing or the other, and if you do too much of one other thing, you're no longer the first thing, right? If I'm a cartoonist and I'm working on a graphic novel, but I have to work at, you know, the pharmacy for 40 hours a week in order to keep a roof over my head, which means I have to work on my graphic novel in 20 hours a week. Well, son, are you a pharmacist or are you a graphic novelist, right? There's that kind of thing that can like become a very dangerous and insidious kind of dialogue with yourself.
I wonder how the nature of that dialogue is changing throughout the generations. I wonder.
I suspect it's changing a lot.
I think it had hopefully the power of that perspective is a little diminished at least, because absolutely there's this sort of perhaps this could be a U.S. quirk. That would be really interesting for our listeners in different places on the globe. Framing stress. I mean, I'm just really curious of like what parts of these are resonating and which ones aren't, and that'd be really interesting. And especially the ones like with this whole like making a trade and like work role definition stuff. I'd wonder, right? Because you hear that like in other places in the world, like I think it was in the book To Sell Is Human, like when you meet when folks in Europe meet one another, they ask, so where are you from? Where people in the U.S. ask, well, what do you do?
What do you do?
And what do you do for a living? And it's a big umbrella judgment. Oh, well, now I know all sorts of things I can assume about you. Thanks for telling me that. And I don't.
You make video games? You mean like Donkey Kong? Love that game.
Exactly.
Comic book art. You're a comics artist. What do you tell jokes? You tell me a joke. Tell me a joke. Be funny.
Yeah, exactly. It may have some informative shortcut to it, but I think we abuse it pretty extremely.
Yeah.
So but I think that a lot of us have navigated, negotiated with that tension. And until you see enough things and that you notice like, well, wait a minute, there are so many people making a go of their next career thing by doing something else. And they may actually have like some deep personal resonance with that thing too. Guess what? You can love more than one thing, right? I wish I could time travel and tell myself this when I was 16, having a crisis over the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo. But like, what are you gonna do?
And yeah. That could be the whole next episode. If folks want us to do that for the whole next episode, you can love more than one thing. 'Cause I think that is a rich topic.
Sure,
do
Sega
let us
does,
know.
Nintendo don't, right?
But like, yeah, it could spiral out into this whole thing about like, and by loving more than one thing, your love for the first thing will be richer. Anyway, moving on.
Okay.
So, any place else we need to go in the 10,000 feet up?
No, I think we covered a lot of space. I mean, that's
Okay.
a big inventory of. I don't know if anyone made it through to this point, honestly, because I wonder, what resonated. Which ones were there? Any things where you're like, oh my gosh, I totally have gone through that, or maybe not exactly that, but something related, or versus like this is now a burden, and I don't need to collect podcasts anymore because they make me sad. So I'm hoping that wasn't the reaction. And if it's not, I think we've got some helpful stuff. We'll try to smile.
As a guy who consumes the shoegazy music every once in a while, I'm still going to be subscribing to your podcast, Rob. But for the folks who may be on the edge, who are like, oh, should I stick around? Here's what we're going to do. In about 1 minute and 30 seconds, we are going to talk about ways that we've practiced living with and existing with stress. Not eliminating it. We're not calling the Orkin army to take them out. Oh, does that even work anymore? Did I just make like I might as well have made a Phil Donahue reference with that one.
Onion belts all the way down.
Even that one is old, right?
I know. Exactly.
Oh, just blow the dust off of this one. But in 1 minute and 30 seconds, we're going to talk about ways that practices that we have employed to coexist with this stuff, and ways we've learned to listen to the signal and learn not to battle the signal, and ways to manage the signal. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But before we go there, we're going to take a break to talk about our Patreon page. So, yes, Patreon, this thing where you can support artists while they make a thing. It's like Kickstarter, but for ongoing things. And people can pledge $1 a month, as little as $1 a month, to help make something more sustainable. And we have a Patreon page for Lean Into Art at patreon.com/leanintoart. And we post shows in between the main show called Extra Lean, where we just kind of riff on a topic, sort of let a topic emerge. And we also have these open mic posts where we just sort of lead with a prompt and let the community take it wherever they want, and we respond to them there in a safe, private place only available to people who support us on Patreon. And I want to take this opportunity to give shout outs to 5 of our supporters who have been super awesome in helping make the show more sustainable. Jay Taylor, and Jay Taylor can be found on Twitter at Taylor_FS3. Jesse Hughes can be found at PlummyPress on the Twitters. Mark Falk at the_Chagall, SHAGAL on Twitter. Catherine Sugru. Thank you, Catherine, for supporting us. Catherine can be found at Cat Does Things on the Twitters. And then Elvin Dantes at Elvin Dantes. Thank you guys all for your support of the show and helping to make, make our time paid for, right? Did I say it right?
Your support means a ton to us. Thank you very much. And people paying for the time.
People can support us at Lean Into Art, or patreon.com/leanintoart.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to everybody who does, and thanks to everybody who's considering it. Mm-hmm. All right, Rob, ready to go on the ground?
Yeah. What's going to happen?
I usually like to lead with the heavy music going, the on the ground part, but I'm gonna a little bit lighter this time, because this is about moving on and coping, not just enduring.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. Is it just enduring, and when does it? I guess it's either way you're experiencing it, and it's just a matter of how are you relating to it. I mean, to me, one of those might indicate a different capacity. I'm really big into this idea that how I relate to my projects is all about my it's my skill. Yeah, it's time and attention and whatnot, but it's this general. In general, it's one big thing called capacity. What do I have to bring to this? And, is it enough? If it's not enough, and then that may be stressful to like have to increase my capacity temporarily to the thing. If I've done something long enough, then maybe I've permanently increased my capacity, and I'm able to something that would have been super hard to endure was more of like a mildly tense challenge. Now later on, that kind of thing, like recurring stress over time doesn't have to feel the same.
Oh gosh, I hope not. I think about something I was saying to you off mic, and I don't think I need to go into any specific detail, but I'm encountering some different projects that I got to take on. I want to, and I've got to take on this summer. Got to in the sense that I agreed to them, so now I've got to. I've made a commitment to people that to whom I do not want to disappoint. Is that right? For whom? Anyway. So I specifically use the words, I don't know how I'm going to achieve these things, but I know I can, and I know I'm going to. The stress is more about knowing that it's going to be tough, knowing that it's going to be intense, and having that resistance of not. It's the moment of coming up to the top of the roller coaster, right? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy! Oh my God! Now I'm in it. There's no turning back now. But that moment before, that moment when you're looking at the blank page, that moment when you're looking at like the beginning of your work week, and you're like, oh, I got to do all these things this week. How's it going to happen? When going back to your original example of the intern that comes in is like, what do I got to do now? I remember starting a job years ago. It was at a real estate magazine, and I was kind of brought in, and I didn't realize it until I was there. I was brought in to help them come up with a system for doing the graphic design and organization for an entire, like all of Phoenix, Arizona, for real estate. That meant like organizing all of the house listings in terms of JPEGs and image files, coming up with a way to do the design in Quark Express and get it to some kind of format that a printer could use, and do it on a schedule, and do it in a way that salespeople could also work with the designers and the clients to make like a harmonious kind of like loop of design process so that everybody was happy. And so like I came in, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do graphic design. I've done this a bunch of times. And I was like, oh, wait, I got to do all that? That is the panic of how can I possibly do this, right? But then you go through a few things and you're like, okay, I know I have the capacity. I've built the capacity. Now the stress is, for me at least, it becomes more about like, ooh, I got to use that capacity again. But there's another stress that's in there too, is being okay with the stress of having to tell somebody that you don't have the capacity and backing off of something too, which is a different thing altogether, right? Oh, I got to brace myself for this very difficult conversation where I have to tell this person, I thought I could do it, can't do it. I had to do that a couple times.
Gosh, even like capacity and commitment, I think, are a really powerful pair, right?
Yeah.
So you can commit to something that is like beyond your capacity, find a way to adapt. Maybe if you can't adapt, then you have to now deal with breaking the commitment. Yeah. Well, all these things are different areas of concern that are practicable by finding resources and that you identify with like methods for like you described the whole like systemic design process. Like there's there would be a lot of resources nowadays. You could have probably gone to the library and explored and found some inspiration. And if it wouldn't have been direct, like some indirect process you could borrow and steal from other places. Like I don't know, like how do anyway, I don't know. It's just, I'm not to just wander down that example, but like it's funny, like if you found an article in some magazine behind the scenes of like, oh, here's how we get this out on a monthly basis or whatever, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not exactly what I'm dealing with, but all of a sudden now you've upgraded your capacity for the.
But in that case, and this is something that I think about whenever I'm taking on a new project, is if I go on the hunt for answers in a panicked, I need the answers, I need the answers, I need the answers, then I don't find those things as easily or readily because I've got the static of the I need the answers, I need the answers in my way, right? But when I recognize that, okay, the stress is a signal that this thing needs to be attended to. I heard you stress, but I'm still going to calm myself down. Not oh gosh, I feel like that's a dangerous phrase. I'm going to do my best to be attentive to what's happening in this exact moment, and I'm going to. Or you
Yeah, coexisting with the stress instead of so you don't have to kill it, right? I mean,
Right.
and like calm it down. You know, it could mean like, you go hush that stress somehow. I don't care what it takes. And versus like, well, it's just hanging out there, right? No one has to, you know,
you
do
don't
anything
need to punch the stress.
You don't have to punch it or anything. Yeah.
But then saying like, okay, I hear you. But right now, we're gonna go on. We're going. Okay, so this is the inner dialogue that I have when I'm doing this. Is that, and this came out of actually doing the Lean to Art podcast. So maybe doing a podcast is a way to deal with stress. But I remember one year, my word for the year was trust. Trust in myself that I have the capacity and the skill and the ability to do the things that I'm going to take on, even if it's scary. And actually even better if it's scary a little bit, because that's a signal that I'm doing something interesting, right? But knowing that, like, let's say you use the example of like, okay, I'm going to have to look up, like, how do other designers tackle this problem of organizing this much information? Do I just go on to Twitter and say, help, help? Or do I go to the library, right? This was like in 2001, so there was no, this is actually in 2000, there was no Twitter. But, okay, I'm going to go to the library. And I'm going to trust that I'm going to find something useful here. It may not be the elixir, just add water, miracle answer that I would love to have. But it's going to start me on the path. It's going to be something that starts me on the path. And I'm not going to find that little nugget unless I'm being attentive in my search. And so that's what I mean by calming down. It's like not about like punching or silencing or choking your stress. It's more like, okay, I hear you, and I'm going to acknowledge that feeling's there, but I'm also going to, attend to the task that I need in order to serve the stress in a mindful way. Did I say things right there? I don't know.
Oh, I think that is super useful. One there's a variety of things that you reminded me of. One of them is the book Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. So this can be both sort of you relating to a sort of a solo stress, or it could be a group situation too, because you can run into this like when you're on a collaborative team, and like what's the collective approach to dealing with that? Like you mentioned, trusting that by moving forward, or by trusting this process, trusting yourself, and you're going to grow some kind of solution, discover, piece together something exists out there, right? So having some kind of open mindset, believe like possibility exists versus scarcity, and combining that with trust is really helpful. And like you can notice when that's not happening, like if people are or you or anyone else doing that kind of like trying to just stop the thing, avoid the thing, and that can that essentially will erode and wear away any trust that exists, especially in a group situation.
Yeah.
Because I mean, at least you still have yourself to try to struggle with the topic. Once you've disconnected from others you're working with, it's pretty easy to stay disconnected, versus like somehow crossing that scary boundary of like being vulnerable and reconnecting. So that book is full of those kinds of themes, and really good examples, food for thought and research, where that book came from her. I can't remember what was her primary topic, but what emerged was she chose to dive into a thesis about vulnerability. So when you're comfortable being vulnerable, like, how would you describe that state? Like, would you allow new information? Would you shut it out?
No, that's exactly it. Yeah, like, so when I'm absolutely at ease and around people that I have, implicit trust around, that's when I'm at my most receptive, right?
Mm-hmm.
The definition of defensiveness, right? I don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not listening because there's something here that's not registering properly, right? Whereas when my defenses are completely down, I'm attentive and listening to the thing. Yeah, and I think maybe part of that dialogue, for me at least, when I'm like on the mad hunt for answers to fix a thing, is that I don't have time to screw this up, right? I don't have time to be wrong. And what's more is, it's shameful to be wrong. I'm the guy who delivers, right? You hire me, you're going to get a thing shipped, it's going to be on time, and it's going to be great, and it's never going to be wrong.
Yeah, that's a high risk commitment. Right?
Nice way to understate it.
It's, let's see. So you mentioned the like earlier, like having to go back and like deal with not living up to a commitment, right?
Yeah.
But then what if that relationship, what if there is the ability to have good communication, create new understandings, right? So like what you've done is, if you've gone through a process of learning, and if you're with someone who's not in an adversarial relationship, who is willing to go on that learning journey with you, and I mean, if you really, I mean, there's this isn't about avoiding accountability, but it's sometimes it's possible to sort of reshape a commitment, renegotiate. You know what? You asked me to do this thing, especially if you called it ahead of time. It makes it easier. If you're like, there's a big risk about this, and then as it's playing out, keeping the trust and communication going, where it makes it possible to do that versus walling off and trying to live up to a thing that has all this risk surrounding it. I mean, the thing with risk is, humans aren't very good at calculating odds, and we think like, well, of course I'm going to win the lottery, and of course I can do this project that has all these different constraints that are past certain boundaries that I know I've never succeeded at before, or at least in this time frame or whatever. Yeah. So if you ignore that, then maybe there's another learning there for you.
Yeah.
Besides the distasteful situation of dealing with talking about and managing that miscommitment.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm hearing here is having regular check-ins with where you are with it, with the project, with the relationship, with your own emotional relationship with the project, is a way to live with that stress in a more healthy way, perhaps. Like for instance, again, going back to the Warren Commission Report project, that graphic novel that I worked on with Dan Mishkin and Ernie Colon, which is a good example just because it was such an intense experience. And my relationship with the gig changed the moment that I created a spreadsheet that was shared with all interested parties, right? With my editor, with Dan, the writer, with Ernie, the other artist, so that all of us had an at-a-glance look at where the thing was. So we had a real concrete idea of where everything was, and we had constant discussions about how things were going with it, right? Whether it was through email, whether it was through Google Hangouts or telephone calls, there was constant discussions happening. Now, before that happened, my editor would call and say, like, where are we with the book? I'm like, I think we're okay. And that doesn't make her feel good. That doesn't make me feel good, right? And I'm like, well, and I would say things like, well, I'm going to do my best, Well, that doesn't make me feel all that much better.
How did you go from one situation to the other? Because there must have been some signals from the stress or something to go from
Well, okay, so having a writer and an editor constantly asking me where are we with this, and having no way of giving them a concrete idea of where it was a
Mm.
very strong signal. And then also the signal of my constant, I would describe as almost terror, not quite terror, but pretty darn close to terror, that I'm not going to ship. You know, if I don't ship, this not only jeopardizes a potential working relationship for future gigs, this jeopardizes my friendship with Dan. There's too much writing on it. And so then there was like this moment of like this can't go on. There was this like crisis moment of like, I can't let this go on like this another second. And I think it might have even been Anne who said, like, have you ever considered using a spreadsheet? And my wife, who's been on the show before, talking about spreadsheets and about organizing information. Thankfully, I'm married to an information scientist who, you know, gave me a little nudge in that direction. I was like, oh, it can automatically tabulate things for me, and now I have this wonderful color-coded, at-a-glance look at where the project stands. It did not kill the stress, but it changed the way I felt about it, right? It became more often a stimulant rather than a paralytic.
This is really handy. Like taking something from being very ambiguous and hard to think about to making it more concrete and easy to think about.
Yeah.
It didn't solve the problem, but it made it way easier to engage with the problem. And that to me is like that's finding I mean that's adapting and finding some way to I think it ended up maybe helping reframing. I want to talk a little bit more about reframing too coming up, but it's really interesting that like that. I mean, it didn't instantly like double everyone's productivity. It didn't, but it sounds like it helped the relationships in the project a little bit.
Absolutely
Like
helped
more,
the relationships. It helped the relationships, and it helped, like I said, like it helped how I felt about it. It turned it into this. It turned into this is intense, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. Into this is intense, and I have a plan to do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of going back to 10,000 feet up, but like this happens almost with every new thing I try. When I'm trying something that I've never done before, there's always this terror of the ambiguity of the thing. Like when I was doing a pitch for a book about a topic that I've never drawn before. It was about a topic where like precision was absolutely essential, and I can't fake anything in it. It's not like drawing animals doing people things. This is like a really serious like nonfiction subject. And I agreed to do the pitch pages for it. And then the moment I agreed to it, I mean, I literally like I freaked out. I got like super grumpy and really like I don't want to say angry, but just like really bristly. You know, like any of my friends who would have talked to me at that point were like, "What's his problem? Why?" Because there was this. I was so nervous about how can I do this? I don't know how to do this. And then the moment I sat down and started like just okay, let's collect some research material. Let's get a reference library put together. Let's set a timeline of when you're going to do this thing and give yourself a little bit more time than what you think you need. And suddenly it got to be a little bit more manageable.
It's that's a pretty powerful trick, switching from like this seems impossible. Is this impossible? And to and not like that was exactly how you were framing it, but it was sort of like things along that worry path.
This was in To Sell Is Human, wasn't it? Where he talks about Bob the Builder, right? And like Bob the Builder always, and I never watched it myself. I mean, but and that's not to like recuse myself of anything. It's just like I never watched it. But like I was surprised to hear that
you're mentioning a cartoon. You know, it's worth. Yeah,
a cartoon I haven't seen. But the part of the formula of the show is he encounters a problem, and then he turns to his fellow compatriots and the audience and says, "Can we fix it?" Which is a different way of engaging it with, like, you know, how are we going to fix it? It's like, can we fix it?
Well, and or like I've never fixed this in the past. That's not what we do here. I haven't seen this problem before. Versus and one that we use a lot when in facilitating and exploring some um, exploring some topic and trying to find new solutions, it's a design thinking thing called phrase, just how might we, right? Or how might I do this? And, because, right, okay, great. Maybe you haven't done this before, but time to investigate. How could it happen? And believing that the could is it's totally possible. Unless you totally prove it's not.
Which is in itself a valuable learning experience as well, right?
Because then you probably can renegotiate the commitment.
Yeah.
Because now, like, you're not just hand waving and saying like, "Oh, big scary, I don't know." And you're saying like, "This is what I examined, and here's what I explored." Now you're involving them in your exploration, in your learning process, sharing your learnings, and probably building a stronger collaborative relationship for whoever you're helping out. So it's so, whereas the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to be vulnerable can lead to like some pretty great client experiences where you think like, oh, always being perfect, never always on time, and all this kind of stuff. It's maybe it's like always on time after exploring things and testing out enough assumptions to know we can do it, and then getting the evidence that it can happen. Therefore, being confident that you have the capacity to meet the commitment. But then it's so funny. Like, we avoid those kinds of the conversations where it looks like you might be wrong. And I think there could be a lot of really interesting, helpful conversations to have there.
I mean, I could easily step in and go like, yes, being wrong is a pleasurable experience because that means I'm learning something, and that's true. It's an easy thing to forget. It's so easy to forget. So I was just at a conference last weekend, and I mean, I met a lot of different kinds of people, and I got a lot of really wonderful experiences and wonderful lessons from people, but I got some really excellent anti-lessons from people who were operating out of that sort of assumption of, all right, I got to come in here and I got to be the expert on this. And, before you say that, I got to say something that's very experty, right? And like, I noticed that the dynamic in those kinds of encounters with those kinds of people was they weren't really helping me in any way. They had the appearance of being helpful, but there was very little in there that I was actually being able to use because they weren't actually speaking to anything that I was necessarily worried about at the time. And the thought of, and I thought about this, it was like sort of like this reminder to me, like, you know what, when I encounter people, I really need to not feel like I have to prove my credentials to them. I really need to listen to what they need to know, and if I have something to help with that, then yes. Anyway, yeah. So like being wrong and the wonderful usefulness out of being wrong, allowing oneself to be seen as being incorrect, so as to learn a new thing, is it's a wonderful thing on paper, and it's an easy thing to forget. That's all I wanted to say with that.
Super, yeah, very pragmatic view there. I agree.
I have to remind myself of it all the time. But I wonder if we could talk about reframing a little bit, because you said something reframing. Really, oh man, it hit me like a lightning bolt last week, Rob. And it was off mic. We were just talking about what's going on in our lives, and I was telling you about all the things that I'm up against this spring. And you said something. How did you say it? You said, how do you feel about the meaningfulness of all the activities you're engaged in? Something along that line. You brought up the fact that that these things somehow were extra meaningful because I was so invested in their success, or I was so stressed out about whether or not they were going to succeed. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Totally borrowing something from the book about The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. It's essentially it's more or less a thesis about mindset psychology, and especially the concept of a mindset intervention. One of those, let's see. I was attempting to point out how there's likely the signal of a lot of stress often points to there's a lot of meaning going on too, where it's like, oh, I'm starting a new job, or I've got these different all these projects that I'm doing. I've got 5 clients at once, or whatever it is. I'm getting married, I'm having a baby, or I'm whatever, right? I'm moving, and combine any of these things. Likely that means you've got a pile of meaning, and you believe in what you did to bring that meaning about, and so getting a reminder of that is incredibly helpful to reframing stress. So one way to look at the exercise, I think, that I stole from the book, and I said, well, if those things weren't in your life, would your life have more meaning or less meaning?
That's what you asked me. That's what you asked me. That was great.
And which is a mixed bag, because you're like, well, yeah, I really believe in this stuff. And it's freaking hard. It's still hard. Dang it. Yeah. But it somehow had the flavor of the frustration and difficulty and the pain of the stress. I think it changes, which is why I've been rereading the book.
I just ran into this not long ago with the Boulder and Fleet webcomic, in that it started out as, this is the personal project I'm doing just for me, right? I'm going to carve out 4 to 5 hours a week to work on this personal thing, to express myself in the way that I want to be expressed. I made a commitment. I made an explicit commitment in the form of a Patreon page. And the moment I did that, I no longer feel like I have the luxury of taking a week off, right? Even though there's nothing in writing on any of the websites that say Boulder and Fleet will update at this day and time every week. I've never made that claim publicly. Said it updates every week, but I never said I promised to. But the moment I made a Patreon page, I was like, oh, I'm kind of accountable to a group of people now, right? Explicitly. And suddenly my relationship with the comic changed a little bit, whereas like this thing that was supposed to be this pleasurable experience became this extra to-do list item. Oh, I got to do that this week too. And I was as I was in the middle of I recently wrapped up a rather intense period of teaching where I was teaching 5 days a week. And my first day where I didn't have to teach, and I was like, I got the whole day. I don't have to go anywhere. This is amazing. All right, I'm going to pull up Boulder and Fleet. I'm going to work on that. Ugh, I don't really feel like working on that right now.
That's awesome. You have to do a mini comic about this. Dang it.
Oh. And I realized that okay, this thing that's supposed to be not stressful is causing me stress. How come? Why is that? And this goes back to what you were saying. Because it matters. If it didn't matter, I wouldn't care.
Well, and you've used one of the constraints you brought into the project, or one of the well, you added the whole heartbeat, right? I mean, so in having a some kind of cyclic creative process, a heartbeat really, really helps.
Yeah.
But also it creates the tension now, where there's
because you don't want the heart to stop.
You don't want the heart to stop. But, hey, we're starting this thing. We're going to make a thing together. Oh, we better meet. We're going to meet now, and we're going to have these tasks. Tasks are going to have deadlines or whatever, or we're going to ship a version every other day, a version every week, or whatever. All of a sudden, you've got these things that are like these that add to the pulse of a project. Totally helps project, but guarantee, they're more commitments, and they tax your resources. And yeah, so again, stress is a signal that your resources are getting taxed.
Could you talk about the 5 whys? I don't know what this is.
Okay, so the 5 whys. All right. Well, reframing and trying to find the meaning. It can be it can be difficult to be. For me, I use the 5 whys is another sort of design collaborative technique where you try to explore some kind of assumption. An assumption can be when you're making a thing, it can be we've got to have this feature. If the thing we're making had better have this, secure bonus page for the subscribers, right?
Boulder Fleet has to be in color.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
It has to be, and for whatever reason, right? So it could be an expert opinion, informed or whatever, but like if there really isn't like this, clear constraint or evidence driving or whatever, it's kind of an assumption. Even like a goal, like I found myself doing, like there's a couple of goals I captured this year that I didn't know why, and so I forced myself through. I mean, they're sort of self-evident goals. They're kind of personal, so I'm not going to go into them. but I thought, well, why can't I describe this goal very well? That's weird. So you can essentially peel away. So just step by step, ask yourself why again. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. I wish to run 5 miles, right? Mm-hmm. And well, why do I want to run 5 miles? Well, I think it's going to be an indicator of general improved fitness, right? Well, why do I want general improved fitness? Well, because it's there's a lot of you know what? I was at a party and there was someone bragging to me about how they don't how they hired a trainer and they don't listen to them, and then like there's whatever, and I was like, this is the weird, why am I even at this party? And this is frustrating. Like, why don't you care about like being? Then I'm like, oh wait a minute, I know why that made me mad. Why did that make me mad? Because I want to be around to see my kids longer, right? That kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's why. Right? And you find kind of like little by little, following a signal, keep digging.
Does getting to that signature why, I mean, this is totally like maybe potentially a side topic, but does it inform the way you engage with the original task again?
It suddenly has way more meaning, right?
Okay.
And so again, I think it relates to our whole the reframing, where again, like having this meaning of like, well, hey, I'm like going to night school while having a day job and a family, whatever, is super stressful. What's the point, right? And then you can always, well, why are you doing this? And or maybe you did that exercise already and you can just cut to the chase and pull out that reminder. One of the devices that Kelly McGonigal recommends in the book is that it's just write it down. Like write down your, like, what are the values or the principles or the beliefs that you're doing here, kind of like this underlying reason that when you're reminded of it, it actually does help give a new context to all of this difficulty.
Yeah.
So
agreed. I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah, okay.
So do we want to talk about mindfulness practices or self-care, or I mean, like, what other like strategies have we used?
Yeah, so there's I mean, there's a lot to this. Like, how do you increase your capacity to or skillfulness in dealing with the stress? One of the things that we've, it's, recurring themes on our podcast. So doing some kind of gosh, where did you mentioned the, like, somewhere, one of your examples, that it essentially touched on like doing some kind of reflection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you just get into like, well, capture this information so you can look back at it and you can learn. You've got like more tools to help in your learning toolbox to help you adapt, right? Which is a bit of a doing some self-reflection and that kind of mindfulness. But then there's mindfulness disciplines in psychology and Buddhism, meditation. Just about practicing that sort of ability to notice.
Yeah, meditation can mean a lot of different things, and neither of us are Zen monks, but
I barely,
um,
I can say I barely meditate once a month.
have you been using the Headspace app?
Yeah, when I was riding the bus on a regular basis.
Oh, really? You were doing it when
Yeah.
you were like in a public space?
Yep.
Neat. No,
Yeah. It was.
I did this. I did the same thing without an app. Like again, going back to like 2000, 2002, when I used to commute to work, I had to ride the commuter line when I lived in Phoenix. And it was like a 40-minute bus ride,
Yeah.
and that was an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to like just close my eyes and hopefully not fall asleep, and just breathe, breathe, and practice focusing. And I did the kind where you focus on a part of your body. Right, I'm thinking about my shoulder. I'm just gonna think about my shoulder, think about my shoulder, think about my shoulder. Right, and other thoughts are going to occur to me, but I'm gonna let them fly by, and I'm just gonna keep thinking about my shoulder. Like that's a kind of mindfulness to practice, and it's not. It was never to achieve enlightenment. It was more to practice a skill of I'm attending to a thing with all of my consciousness. Right, which boy oh boy did that like. Not only does it calm me down, but it helped align me for encountering tasks that needed my attention, right?
Yeah. I mean, it really is a skill, and that really is practicing that skill. It's an odd skill to point at. It's not lifting a thing. It's not putting a line on a piece of paper or digital screen in a particular way. You know what I mean? There's no like the performance. It's so internal, and it makes it kind of alien compared to other skills.
But I mean, we're visual storytellers, so a lot of what we do is internal. I mean, it's like it should seem like the on ramp to that should be fairly short for most people who listen to this show.
Yeah, fair enough. I wasn't trying to like scare anyone off or whatever, but I think it's reasonable to like, it can seem odd. Right?
It can. Yes,
and especially can. Like, wait a minute, you guys are doing this on the bus? That sounds weird. You don't have to be on the bus. It turns out, actually, I agree. Like that when you're sitting in that one spot, why not?
Yeah, it's an opportunity.
For me, I noticed. So I did I do part of it with my eyes closed. Part of it, I would just observe traffic going by, and then seeing if I could. Just focus on breathing, and there was so much visual input to see like what caught my eye. Notice that I got distracted, and practice not being concerned about being distracted, and then keep on breathing.
Yeah, so that was the other kind I practiced as well, and this one I did as a walking exercise. So I would walk for half hour to an hour. And the goal was to focus on breathing and just try to, this is going to sound goofy, but I would try to see as much as I could. In other words, try not to make associations, try not to value judge, try not to make any connective thoughts, but just notice that's sidewalk, that's grass, that's tree, that's sky, right? That's light, that's dark, Try to like have like an empirical observation walk. And I did that for like 2 years, like where that was like a regular practice. That was like almost nightly I was doing that, which also had the benefit of calming me the heck down, and just attending to tasks a lot more. And another thing that I've noticed, and I've noticed a lot more as I've taken up running recently, and I'm by no means like awesome at it. I mean,
it's okay to be pursuing fitness.
Yes.
I'm trying to tackle you from you're reaching for the disclaimer counter. I'm like,
I know, but there is. I don't have the super suit yet, right? The super pants that the people wear when they run, and I know when I get those, and I'll be like, okay, I'm a real runner now. I got the shoes. I got the shoes, but I don't have like the Spider-Man costume yet.
All right.
Anyway,
do you have a threshold where you will get the Spider-Man costume?
I think when I start clearing like. I want to clear 12 miles a week. When I start doing that, I think, okay, nice. I'm justifying the expense at this point. Anyway, but like I did notice that like 30 minutes of repetitive physical activity is awesome for cleansing the mind. I mean, just emptying it out and letting it become more receptive, because all you have, like, when you're just trying not to fall down, like, keep moving, keep breathing, and don't fall down, which is where I'm at right now. I don't have time to think about, oh, I didn't pay my taxes yet, and it's really like it's a good opportunity for a mind dump, and it's very repetitive, you know. And I've talked about this before, like doing dishes, doing repetitive physical labor is awesome for doing like a big old mind dump and letting new thoughts in.
Yeah, it's so okay. So putting yourself in new circumstance, considering doing some kind of physical routine aspect of that. It's yeah. I find I actually do want to get into running, but so far I've been using like the. It's so funny because I want to reach for the discounter claimer too. The disclaimer counter. The what do you call it? The elliptical machines and treadmills and stuff like that. I don't know why. It's kind of they're fun. It's almost like a game contraption thing,
and
which is inherently appealing to me.
They're also less impact, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because the impact thing is important. I mean, when I first started, I wasn't stretching properly, and I messed up my knee pretty darn good. Where like it was kind of, I was hobbling for a while, and I was like, "Ooh, am I too old to be doing this?" But then I did a little research, and I was like, "Oh, guess what, dummy? You're supposed to stretch for like a good 20 minutes before you do anything this intense, because you're pounding the ground over and over again, right?" Whereas with an elliptical and with bicycles, like cycling, so I was talking with some friends of mine who like do like really intense cycling, like 20 miles a day kind of thing, and yeah, they don't have these problems because it's just it's a repetitive motion and it's intense, but it's not pounding the body the way running does.
Yeah, I suppose running you're somehow gracefully chucking yourself a lot, right?
Yeah.
And just landing, repeatedly.
But okay, so I do want to address this real quick, and because we're also talking about stress, we're talking about strategies to live with it. Part of that strategy isn't just the physical exercise itself. Part of it is conditioning yourself to make the time for self-care, right? Because part of the trap for me with stress is that the only way out of this stress is to enslave myself to it and just keep working and working and working until the problem is solved. And if I stop for 45 minutes to do some physical activity, that's 45 minutes I could be using to fight that stress. Right.
That is awesome. And like to me, so this was a really good exploration. Like my takeaway is that it's conditioning yourself to managing your capacity. That's like a very helpful stress relationship practice. So the ability to manage your capacity all of a sudden gives you a lot of new ways to relate, to help introduce new experiences, to say like, well, I do need to invest time in learning that thing so I'm better set up for this project, or I do need to invest time in mindfulness practice, or I'm just going to go take a class on psychology or whatever, to help become just more skilled in this, that to even have that time, there's a little bit of the whole navigating the tension until you, I'm slippering on meta bananas everywhere here, to try to finish this thought.
That's just meta bananas.
It is meta bananas, it's getting enough practice to keep practicing is the meta bananas.
And and knowing that the practice takes a lot of different forms, and that muscling through is not always the heroic path.
Oh my gosh. No, it's not. And I say that from so many failed attempts at powering through. Like,
yeah.
Yep.
And that what can seem to be a distraction can actually be exactly the recharge that you need. And you can't. This is what I learned, is that I can't always wait for my body to tell me that I need it. Like, I have to schedule. And this is where journaling came in super handy, is that I found out through keeping track with the ETP that it's around 2 o'clock. If my day starts at 10, it's around 2 that I need to do something physical, because my productivity dips hard. And if I do something physical at 2 and then come back to it, I come back refreshed, and I come back and I work just as hard as I did at 10. So I wouldn't have known that otherwise, because I'm not, when you're embroiled in the thing and you're in flow state, you're not listening to your body, right? That's part of the glory of flow state.
Exactly. And we don't remember enough of our days to necessarily have like great ability to get instant insight on, like, you know, a month or week of experience, to know, like, well, did I run enough? When is a good time to do that? It's hard to just pull this out of nowhere. So again,
Right.
like, that's where
Like, what did you
journaling
have for
practice
lunch
helps
on
a
February
lot.
15th, right? What did you have for lunch? What
Yeah.
time did you have lunch on February 15th, right? Yeah.
That's
Super
cool.
hard.
Like, I don't capture that much detail, but I do capture like what I like.
I meant as
the
like just sort of like just an
feelings and
example,
what-
like
yeah.
metaphorically speaking.
It is a
right?
good example, and like, but the emergent task planner is one thing to help with. Like, its benefit is the precision of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good for those time windows and yeah, like you did a post. Is that a private post on our Patreon?
Yeah, that's on the Patreon, and it's
Yeah.
only for supporters
for
of.
supporters.
I actually walked through the whole way I use it with the color coding and everything, and explained my process of capturing on the ETP. So if you want to check that out, go to patreon.com/leadintoart, and you can read the blog post about it and follow up with comments, questions there. So Rob, I think we walked around it. Do you want to like do closing thoughts in a minute?
Yes.
Okay. Before we do that, this show is a podcast, which means it is an audio show, which you might be listening to on your podcatcher or your mobile device, but it's also a video podcast. And as such, that means there are easy ways for you to help other people discover this thing. If you found value out of it, it'd be super appreciated if you helped other people find that value. And one way to do that is to go to iTunes, give the show a star review, however many stars you think it deserves, or you could write a review. That also makes us exceedingly happy. If you are watching the show on YouTube right now, giving the show a thumbs up. What do these two activities achieve? It helps make the things more findable by people who are looking for stuff like this. And the more people who find it, the more people enjoy it, the more people who will support us on Patreon. And that all around brings our numbers up to make this thing into a sustainable project. So it's a simple, relatively easy thing to do that costs you only a few moments of your time, that contributes to, it adds up to helping the show in a major way. And thanks to everybody who does give the show a thumbs up and star reviews on iTunes. We really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, closing thoughts, Rob.
Okay. I think there are a lot of resources that can help with this. I think depending on where you're at, there's again, it's worth mentioning. Let's see. Did we do what was the episode we did with Casey Van Heist? Did we talk about like self-care, or there was a kind of a theme that came up? Yeah. Okay. I remember that was a good episode, and it was a lot of fun. I recommend checking it out, because Casey had tons of awesome wisdom. And one thing that we mentioned was just, it's important to know that like resources like counseling exist, and there's just like coaching and ways to like get a foothold to then go on your own and continue practicing this stuff. Because like a lot of what we said was based on sort of doing your own thing and practicing with that. But you know, it's yeah. You have a reaction to that?
Well, I'm reminded of we just this week recorded an upcoming episode of the Galaxy of Super Adventure show. It'll drop in about a month, because it's like for a couple we got a couple episodes in the bank, but we did an episode on superheroes. And we talked a little bit about the Supergirl TV show, which for the record, I am madly in love with. I love that show. It's so good, and it's like I don't even care about Batman versus Superman and all the stuff around that, because I got this Supergirl show, and it's like the perfect superhero show for me. And one of the things about the show is like a lot of people know her secret identity. She's not completely on her own. She's got like a support network. She's got her sister. She's got like 3 coworkers who know who she is. She's got her family, like her parents are still alive. They didn't do the whole orphan thing. Well, there's an orphan thing aspect because she's from Krypton, but she's got human adopted parents who know her secret. So we kind of talked a little bit about how the superhero story traditionally has had this whole kind of like borderline martyr kind of thing where it's like you have to make hard choices and you have to be utterly alone. You can't tell anyone that you're the person who solved these problems, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about Supergirl, in addition to a million other things, is the fact that this is a superhero story where the superhero has a support network. That is so important to have people to talk with. And if you don't have people to talk with immediately in your life, there are resources, there are counselors you can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Absolutely. And if you are, it's important to take advantage of those resources. I think that if you're ready and curious and interested to start exploring, like some of the books that we mentioned, such as Daring Greatly, and which is by Brene Brown, and also the Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. I'd be curious about your reactions to that. So like, check them out, read through, and like what, as you engage with that, what are you finding helpful? It'd be cool to hear some reactions to that. And you could react on Patreon, react to us on Twitter, that kind of thing. Then I'd be curious too, that if you are into like doing a journal, like a fun call to action would be, I think two things, because one of them Jerzy mentioned, where it's like the whole the current stresses in your life. Would you have as much meaning if those stresses weren't there, right? And then I'd be also curious, like, what do you do with your stress? And it's not. I'm not asking you this. Like, this is for your journal. Like, that's between you. That's between you and your journal. I'm not involved. It may have sounded like I was asking you that.
But he threw a smoke pellet.
Exactly.
And Ninja vanished.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Rob, thanks for putting this one together. I think that was a good talk.
Yeah, good talk. Always uncomfortable doing these kind of topics. But I enjoy being vulnerable with you, Jerzy, so it's worth it.
And IU. And this show records every 2 weeks, Thursday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, streamed live on YouTube, usually at, usually you can find it using the short link, comicsargreat.com/live, but also just, follow us on Twitter, and the links to our Twitter accounts will be mentioned in a moment for when we're going to, actually stream the show. But it's 10 p.m. Eastern Time, Thursdays, every other Thursday. And then we have the extra leans in between, which you can check out on our Patreon. Lean Into Art, or rather, patreon.com/Lean Into Art. Thank you to everybody once again for supporting us there. Until next time, I've been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jerzy on Twitter.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
Okay, I'm going to kill the stream, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.